Chosen one. Let's get something clear right from the start. You weren't just underestimated. You were misread on a cellular level. They thought they had you labeled, boxed, and sorted. But you didn't come to fit their categories. You came to redefine what's possible. To those watching this unfold, you're not ordinary. You're not following someone else's formula. You're writing your own. And today was proof of that. What just happened wasn't noise, wasn't luck, wasn't a fluke. It was calculated, intentional, and undeniable. You didn't make a ripple. You dropped a signal the whole room could feel in their spine. And the wildest part? You're just getting started. People are scrambling now, flipping through mental scripts that no longer make sense. Why? Because you shattered the version of you they were comfortable believing in. And now, every assumption, every side comment, every underestimation, they're all boomeranging back to hit them in the face. So, to the ones who are locked in right now, reading this with a grin because you know it's talking about you. Yes, this is your moment. Own the fact that you didn't just shake the table. You built a new one while they were still measuring the old one. And now they're trying to catch up to a standard you've already outgrown. Let's break it all down. What you did, why it hit so hard, and why they'll never look at you the same again. Looking for purpose and peace. Hit subscribe and start the journey. They thought they had mapped every path forward, but you found an opening in the terrain no one had charted. While they obsessed over rulebooks and scoreboards, you quietly shifted the terrain beneath their feet. What they mistook for a delay was actually your detour into unfamiliar territory, terrain where their maps meant nothing. When they finally noticed, the ground rules had already dissolved, and their systems were left spinning without a grip. They had built a fortress on the idea that success must pass through their checkpoints, yet you bypassed the entire route and arrived through a door they never guarded, one they didn't even know existed. Their usual tools, reaction, pattern, containment, crumbled in your absence of predictability. You didn't change the pace of the race. You redirected the entire course. Their confusion isn't just about losing. It's about losing without a clue how it happened. They're combing through every past encounter, trying to decode when control slipped through their fingers. But they won't find a timestamp, because what you disrupted wasn't a game plan. It was their illusion of mastery. The sting cuts deeper when they realize they were never in charge of the destination to begin with. All they ever owned was a narrow frame. And now that the outcome didn't need their framework, their relevance fades with it. What's truly haunting for them is not that you won. It's that you exposed how fragile their model of power really was. Now, every future attempt to rebuild it comes with a whisper of doubt. What if it happens again? Feel God's love stirring within you? Don't let it stop there. Hit the super thank you button and sow a seed of $20 or more. That simple act can ignite hope, heal hearts, and carry His love further than you imagine. You were made to shine His light. This is your moment. Be the miracle someone's been praying for. Let heaven move through you. They mistook routine for reality, mistook comfort for clarity. Years passed where they trusted the walls around them simply because they were familiar, never once considering that what they believed wasn't truth. It was just repetition. Then came the breach. In one moment, what they accepted as solid proved hollow. Not because you injected chaos, but because the veil couldn't hold once clarity entered the room. The illusion collapsed under the weight of its own fiction. The most jarring revelation wasn't external, it was internal. The unsettling part wasn't that a lie was exposed, but that they had built their thinking, their loyalty, and their identity on it. Their certainty shattered not because someone deceived them, but because they ignored every quiet signal that said, "This doesn't add up." Now, the silence of those signs rings louder than ever. The betrayal isn't from others, it's from their own avoidance. Nothing was fabricated on your end. You didn't bend facts or create confusion. You simply allowed what was already broken to show itself. And that's what destabilized them. They're not fighting you. They're fighting their reflection, replaying every decision made in that filtered world. The scariest part is no longer wondering who misled them, but realizing they participated in their own misdirection. Their foundation was built for comfort, not accuracy. And when faced with the undeniable, they saw how far their certainty could drift from reality when convenience becomes the compass. Now every old belief feels suspect. Every prior assumption feels like it might crack under scrutiny. They may still speak with confidence, but underneath, they're trying to regain balance in a space where all coordinates have been scrambled. You didn't scream. You didn't argue. You just turned the lights on, and nothing looks the same now. For as long as it benefited them, they wrapped themselves in a storyline where your path was easy, where outcomes fell into your lap untouched by effort. That narrative helped them rest easy. It excused inaction. It softened their self-assessment. But when you moved in silence and delivered something unmistakably earned, their version of events tore at the seams. The silence afterward wasn't just awe. It was the sound of justification losing its legs. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. They weren't ready for a display that left no cracks for speculation. No shortcuts, no invisible hands, just unmistakable mastery. What followed wasn't just surprise, it was discomfort. Because now they had no shield. The performance spoke for itself. It made excuses obsolete. The comparison wasn't flattering. And this time they couldn't twist the angle. Your outcome showed what consistency looks like. And their reflection showed what avoidance produces. That moment didn't just elevate you, it confronted them. Suddenly, every missed opportunity, every excuse they clung to, resurfaced with teeth. The myth they spun unraveled into threads of regret. And now, with nothing left to discredit your rise, the only place left to look is the mirror. What was once a defensive story now looks like an admission of their own hesitation. They may still smile, still perform calm, but something has changed beneath the surface. The illusion of being held back by circumstance now feels paper-thin. Every new win you achieve isn't just a marker of your journey. It's a reminder of the road they refused to take. And that sting doesn't fade with time. It lingers because it carries the weight of chances they didn't take. You didn't speak to it. You didn't have to. The proof spoke louder than anything they could manufacture. They always wore busyness like a badge, visible, loud, and constant. A calendar full of tasks, always mid-strategy, always almost there. It looked impressive from a distance, like something important must be happening. But when one bold move from you cut through years of talk, with one clean result, the performance cracked. Suddenly, their productivity looked more like avoidance than ambition. Their timelines became suspect. What once passed as dedication now feels like deflection, an endless loop that kept them comfortably occupied while real outcomes remained out of reach. You didn't wait. You didn't seek consensus. You just acted, and that clarity exposed their camouflage. What once felt like structure now resembles a holding pattern, an elegant system for never quite arriving. You didn't just deliver a result. You pulled the curtain back on what they've been hiding behind, the idea that motion equals progress. But movement without intent is just distraction dressed as duty. And now that's impossible to ignore. You introduced urgency without chaos, risk without recklessness, and that rewired the expectations around what it means to execute. Now, each step they take is shadowed by doubt, not from you, but from within. They're haunted by the speed of your precision, by the reality that hesitation isn't strategy. And even if no one says it aloud, everyone feels the shift. They've spent so long equating effort with effectiveness, but your presence broke that equation. Their legacy of preparation now reads more like postponement. And now, each project they plan is stalked by one question. Is this movement or just a mechanism to delay? That's the silent ripple you've left behind. One that echoes louder the more they try to drown it out. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. They long operated as if recognition passed through their judgment, as if the gates they built were the only way anyone could rise. They drew invisible lines around what counted, who belonged, and when success was allowed to happen. But you didn't wait for them to open a door. You walked right past the entire structure and never looked back. The impact wasn't just in what you achieved. It was in how little you needed them to do it. You didn't apply for entry or seek permission. You forged a direction that didn't depend on their roadmap. And in doing so, you dismantled the illusion of their exclusivity. Your rise wasn't through their system. It was in spite of it. That's what shook their foundation. Because when value can exist outside of their endorsement, their grip on relevance starts to loosen. Your results made their criteria look outdated. Your success wasn't filtered through their hands, and now they can't decide whether to dismiss it or fear it. Either way, they weren't prepared. What you built became undeniable proof that progress can't be controlled by tradition. They stood ready to block access, but you redefined the destination, and that terrifies them more than any challenge, because now others are watching, others who once thought they had to wait for a nod of approval. Your path rewrote the unspoken rules, and they can't undo what's been seen. They can't retract what you accomplished. They can't invalidate outcomes that were never tethered to their structure. You didn't knock on their door. You built a new address. And now, every person watching knows that the old gate doesn't guard anything essential. Authority, as they understood it, has been rewritten, and they're no longer holding the pen. They expected noise before change, some grand signal, a telltale shift, a traceable motion. But nothing came. No trail. No warning. While they speculated, dissected, and positioned themselves around imagined threats, the real move was already underway. Quietly, methodically, and completely unseen. Not because of secrecy, but because strength doesn't always announce itself when it arrives. By the time realization caught up, it was too late. What they assumed was still forming had already solidified. The outcome wasn't just finished, it was irreversible. That's what jarred them most. The realization that not only had they been outpaced, but they were never part of the equation. There was no space to intercept, no angle left to exploit. And when control is removed without conflict, it leaves a sharper sting. They were accustomed to reading shifts before they surfaced, relying on fragments of intention, whispers of momentum. But this time, they had nothing to read. Your pace offered no echo, no dust, no prelude. And so when the result landed, it struck like a weight they didn't see falling. The confusion wasn't strategic, it was instinctive. Because nothing prepares people for the moment they realize they weren't even in the room where the outcome took shape. Now they search backwards, reviewing every glance, every move, wondering how the entire mechanism moved past them unnoticed. The truth is, you didn't mask your path. You just didn't owe them a spotlight. And that choice granted you something rare, protection from distortion. What's done can't be dismantled now. There's no adjustment, no override. No cover story strong enough to erase what already exists. That's the shift they'll feel from now on. The understanding that silence can outmaneuver spectacle. That while they were waiting for a signal, the ending had already been written. And every time they try to regain footing, they'll remember how quickly certainty can vanish when someone doesn't ask for permission to succeed. They always comforted themselves with the belief that no one holds real leverage, that everyone can be swapped, shifted, or written out without loss. It kept their sense of control intact, made the system feel self-sufficient. But what unfolded challenged that theory completely. When your presence changed or your involvement ceased, it became obvious that your absence wasn't just felt. It disrupted the entire rhythm. They didn't expect a single adjustment to send ripples through the entire structure. But that's what happened. What they thought was easily replaceable turned out to be the thread that held everything steady. And it wasn't about status or title. It was the rare synthesis of instinct, impact, and presence that couldn't be replicated. The illusion collapsed quietly at first. Subtle errors, missed timing, loss of direction. They noticed, but delayed acknowledgement. The longer they pretended everything was intact, the more visible the fracture became. And now, each imbalance highlights the truth they were trying not to see. That what you brought wasn't optional. It was central. They didn't praise it when you were there, didn't realize its weight until it was gone. That's the part they wrestle with now. Not just that you mattered, but that they failed to admit it when it counted. And the discomfort cuts deeper, knowing they can't retroactively fix it. No replacement fills the gap. No process patches the hole. What lingers is the shift in power. The awareness that some people aren't interchangeable, no matter how much structure surrounds them. That truth doesn't fade, it stays. And now, every time they attempt to move forward, they'll feel the imbalance left in your wake. It's not just about loss. It's about the permanent shift in how influence is measured once someone proves they never needed validation to be essential. They operated under the assumption that the lines were drawn in their favor. They saw themselves as the architects of the environment, convinced they held the levers and dictated the boundaries. Everything felt predictable as long as you remained within their imagined framework. But structures based on assumptions only stand as long as the subject agrees not to question the blueprint. That quiet agreement ended the moment you opted out of their design. You stopped following the pattern they crafted, and in doing so, you removed their ability to forecast your next move. Their influence dissolved, not slowly, but in an instant, because their entire strategy depended on participation, not enforcement. When you refused to mirror their expectations, the mirror cracked. What unsettled them most wasn't your resistance. It was the realization that their authority had always been reliant on compliance. The illusion of dominance faded the second you moved in a direction they hadn't accounted for. And as you kept going, they saw their framework, not as strongholds, but as temporary placeholders you no longer recognized. They thought they'd built a cage, but you revealed it was only ever chalk lines on the floor. Once crossed, those lines became meaningless. That's when they understood they weren't preventing movement. They were just assuming no one would question direction. And you didn't just question it. You rejected it. Now there's a ripple. Others saw what you did, and the quiet realization spreads. The limits were never real. The control they flaunted was conditional, and the condition was belief. You removed belief from the equation, and the structure collapsed in on itself. What remains is discomfort, not because they lost control, but because they now know they never truly had it to begin with. They held a simplified version of you in their minds, not because it was accurate, but because it was convenient. You were smaller, slower, easier to explain that way. That limited portrait made them feel anchored, certain they understood the playing field. And you never corrected the illusion, not out of fear, but out of foresight. Their misjudgment became a shield you never had to lift. While they grew overconfident, you kept working out of sight, building momentum with no need for theatrics. They dismissed your depth, confused stillness for weakness, and underestimated what they couldn't perceive. Their vision blurred by ego. They stopped paying attention where it mattered most. Then the shift came, not as a warning, but as a conclusion. You didn't unfold gradually. You arrived fully formed. And the contrast between the image they crafted and the truth that stood before them was too wide to reconcile. Their assumptions fractured in real time, because the person they ignored wasn't just different, they were dominant. What's most difficult for them now is reconciling how long they were wrong. You didn't grow into strength. You carried it the entire time. They were simply too distracted by their own narrative to notice. Now their oversight echoes back at them, and each echo carries a reminder. While they thought they were in control, you were preparing. They lost more than pride. They lost the safety of thinking they could predict you. That luxury is gone. Your presence now demands attention, and their comfort in underestimating is permanently compromised. What's left is a memory of their oversight, and the undeniable fact that you let them live in that false certainty just long enough to make the truth hit harder than any warning ever could. They entered the game armed with every conventional advantage, well-connected allies, endless capital, and institutional backing. They assumed that with the right tools in hand, the outcome was theirs to claim. But when the dust cleared, it wasn't their empire that stood tall. It was your blueprint, crafted from clarity and driven by instinct, that delivered something they couldn't replicate. While they poured into systems without soul, you made each step count. They believed volume would outrun depth, that with enough force, direction would become irrelevant. But their abundance only magnified their lack of focus. They were building without vision, assuming that more tools would make up for the absence of a map. You didn't just prove otherwise. You set a new standard. You didn't chase momentum. You created it with deliberate accuracy. Their endless funding couldn't buy timing. Their expensive teams couldn't synthesize instinct. And while they scattered resources in every direction, you placed fewer, smarter bets, and won more with less. That's what left them reeling. The realization that impact doesn't scale with spending unless purpose guides the investment. You didn't out-resource them. You outmaneuvered them. Your precision made their power feel clumsy. And no matter how hard they try, they can't purchase the pattern of your foresight. That knowledge leaves them disarmed. Now the metrics have shifted. Influence isn't tied to quantity. It's tied to effectiveness. Every move you make redefines what it means to lead, to create, to build. And though they still hold the purse strings, it's clear they've lost control of the narrative. You reframed the game around ingenuity, and they're still trying to understand the rules you're already rewriting.